as a former CIA targeter, especially with all the people you're calling out today, what do you carry to protect yourself?
Well, if you have to know, chapstick, man.
You gotta be kidding me. Chapstick?
Yes! A lot of people do this.
What are you doing with that?
It's for my lips.
That's
Who wants to dry mouth? I talk all the time.
worried about protecting your lips? Nice.
But no, honestly, I really think like women probably shouldn't say what they have in their toolkit. You know what I mean? Because why let people know what you're capable of doing? I don't even talk about the trainings I had because who needs to know that?
Well, nobody.
Exactly.
I appreciate that. Do you want to talk about any of it or nah?
I think I'm good. I let they can come at me and see what happens.
All right. Well, in that case, we won't talk about it then.
Yeah. We found the number one target of our investigation. So we've never made the number one target of our investigation public. So this will be the first time anyone actually hears about him. When we went to investigate the Benghazi attacks, we had two goals: bring the attackers to justice and stop them from killing anyone else. So he's the number one target for stopping them from killing anyone else. His name is Abdul Azim Ali Musa Ben Ali, long name. So we just call him Musa for short. So back in the day, he fought like everyone with Al-Qaeda in the Mujahideen era. He became a clandestine officer in Al-Qaeda. So what we did in our investigation, we're like, hey, he's had one job forever in Al-Qaeda, and it is to make the fake travel documents for Al-Qaeda's external operatives. So he was involved in Benghazi. He's been ignored since Benghazi, and now he is the one man that knows every terrorist Al-Qaeda is deploying from Afghanistan.
Whoa. And we have no interest in him.
None. In Libya, Al-Qaeda and ISIS came together because they had a mutual enemy, which was the Libyan National Army. And actually, just a couple months ago, one of our most senior terrorists from the Benghazi attacks, his name is Hashim Abu Sidra, was detained in Libya. The interesting part is it hasn't made the U.S. press, but you know what's really interesting about him? At the time he was detained, he was the head of ISIS in Libya, and he was the head of the operational side of Al-Qaeda in Libya. So see how this is now against narratives, right? He was basically the operational head of two groups that you're told don't work together.
Whoa. How are you getting this information?
We are kind of the only ones who work Benghazi, so we actually have a lot of people even just proactively reach out to us now too and say, hey, you know, here's what's happening.
Do you think the government has rectified that segmenting people into this is ISIS, this is Al-Qaeda, this is Taliban?
Of course
this
not.
This is Hamas. It's still compartmentalized.
100%.
Man, that's a real shame. Wow.
When we identified the mortar team, half of the mortar team were family members of FBI's key witness in their first fake mastermind trial against Ahmed Abu Khattala. So they took this Libyan, they paid him millions of dollars, they moved him here. He testified that Abu Khattala was the mastermind of this attack, which we've proven he's not. It's Muqtada al-Mukhtar, a famous AQIM commander. And he basically covered up that 5 members of the mortar team were his family, and this is FBI's witness against Khattala.
How's this happening?
He lives in America. He lives in Virginia, people. So we're actually also protecting terrorists as part of this Benghazi cover-up.
We're harboring them.
Yeah, so we don't have to be honest and say it was Al-Qaeda.
Are you worried at all bringing this information out?
That doesn't fall on me, right? FBI did a failed investigation. They brought a terrorist to America. Someone has to say what they did wrong because he's a threat, right? He doesn't even live that far from the CIA. He is a threat to Americans. And so someone actually has to do the right thing. So what they decided to do is, Africa, we're going to give you ownership of Africa, and you basically take our successes and move them forward. But the way we're going to do that is we're going to give you one of the best Al-Qaeda operational planners ever to exist, and we're going to relocate him from Afghanistan to Mali. So the interesting part is the person who they did this with, his name is Abu Muhammad al-Masri. He's also known as Abdullah Ahmed Abdullah. Every person who knows him is like, he's dead. The Israelis think they assassinated him in Iran. They didn't. They killed the wrong guy. So Abu Muhammad is alive. Al-Qaeda has deployed him to Mali, and he's now, like I said, the head of Al-Qaeda in Africa. And he's also the father-in-law of Hamza bin Laden's second wife.
Whoa.
But it's even better. He's also was involved in the Kenya and Tanzania embassy bombings, and that's why we think U.S. Embassy Bamako is one of the embassies under the most threat right now. The GDI, which is the Taliban CIA, is supposed to be going after ISIS, and they're the ones getting, like, supposedly the majority of the ISIS dollars to hunt ISIS. The biggest issue with GDI right now is they're holding 2 Americans hostage. For everyone who just heard that, yes, you're being lied to. The American in custody, Ryan Corbett, is locked in a cell with another American. It's never been made public. The Taliban are actually holding 3 Americans. Last week, the press finally realize it's 2, but they don't even know. So the Taliban's holding 3 Americans. 2 are locked in a cell together, okay? We are paying them weekly to go after ISIS, and they basically have 2 Americans locked in their basement, suffering like severe health consequences in GDI.
Who are they?
Ryan Corbett is one of them, and then the other one hasn't been made public. The other 2 Americans haven't been made public yet. So that's the biggest problem. We should not be giving a penny to the organization holding Americans in their basement. The $40 million a week that comes on the airplane and comes into Afghanistan. The amount of money on the plane weekly is $43 million to $87 million. But one thing I want Americans to understand is in that bucket of the $40 million we send each week, we are paying basically welfare to the Taliban martyrs' families. So every Taliban member who died during the war with us, the U.S. government is paying them a stipend, the family. So our families of Americans who died there aren't getting squat, but we are paying Taliban families for basically dying while attacking us.
Whoa.
We're funding that.
This is just enraging.
And, you know, I asked a couple of people that question straight out, like, do you not think this is not ethically correct? And actually, one person gave me an answer of, well, it'll stop them from joining ISIS. I'm like, the Taliban guy's already dead. They give you these bullshit excuses as to why they're funding our enemies and not paying attention to the fucking money.
You know this, we have a Patreon account. They're our top supporters. They're the reason I get to sit here and you get to sit here, and they've been with us since the beginning. So one of the things I do is I offer them a question in the interview. First one is from Leo. What type of attacks and locations do you foresee these terrorists choosing?
I don't think a lot has changed on what terrorists want to attack, right? Like they want to hit soft targets. They want to embarrass governments or whomever their enemy is. They want to make a lot of things seem it was inspired by them, right? Even just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen lone wolf videos come out from Al-Qaeda, then Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula and ISIS, right? And they're like, hey, go do things inspired by us. So they still want to kind of get a lot of people involved to kind of like plus up their numbers, right? And make them seem bigger than they are and more powerful than they are. Another thing I think we really need to stay focused on too is attacks on embassies and consulates.
I don't love the information, but you're one of the only people that are out there reporting real info on some of the threats that we face and about the terrorist organizations. And you're going to be given a down and dirty intel brief on all things terrorists in the Sean Ryan Show newsletter. So if you guys are interested and you want to keep up to date on what Sarah's tracking and some of the stuff going on within the terrorist world, sign up for the Sean Ryan Show newsletter.
I joke a lot about terrorism, but obviously it is a serious threat, and we do have a major problem getting information out on what the terrorists are doing right now.
Yeah. You had mentioned the lone wolf videos. What came out recently? What specific lone wolf videos are you referring to?
Yeah, it's just basically the different terrorist groups saying, hey, go do attacks that are inspired by us. One of the more popular ones that's out right now is ISIS put one out to do with the Paris Olympics. So they said, hey, go to where crowds are in Paris. We don't care if you use a knife. We don't care if you use a vehicle. Cause havoc and attack these crowds surrounding the Olympic events. So they're asking people to just go do things. And then obviously they're probably planning things too. So they want to have a large number of attacks if they can bring in these inspired people.
Where are they sending out this messaging?
Most of it goes out in Telegram is the best place to get at least ISIS messaging.
Okay. Wow. The next question is from Brody. In your opinion, are we more likely to suffer an attack on infrastructure like power grid, water supply, etc., or an attack on human life or soft targets? What group is most likely to and has the resources to pull off such an attack?
It's almost two different things, right? Like the terrorists focus on the soft targets. It's almost like the nation state in the near peer who focus on what we would call the infrastructure, the power grid, etc. So it's actually two very different threats, but they're both very active threats, right? Because like, let's say if we were going to go to war with China, well, if they have now taken control of large portions of our electric grid, large portions of our ports, right? They can shut all that down and prevent us from responding to situations. You almost have to look at terrorism in a different lens, right? When you kind of look at the nation state level. So I do think both are a threat, but they're from different actors.
Makes sense.
So the Chinese and the Africans are actually using TikTok, and it's routing them to the southern border. So TikTok's like this human trafficking smuggling application right now that people don't actually understand, but that's how they're making their movements. TikTok is telling them how to do the routing. So it's like, how do you get through this city? How do you get to this country? How do you cross this border? How do you get a visa to this country? Where do you catch a flight to get to South America? When you get to South America, what routes do you take? Where do you go to get aid? Where like the friendly NGOs that'll assist you, like all that type of stuff is inside and being used in TikTok, and they're using this as their routing feature.
Wow.
Almost like we would use like ATAC.
I mean, this has been recently in the news. Do you think we should ban TikTok?
I think we should ban TikTok because it's a spy collection platform. I would never put TikTok on my phone. But I think focusing on TikTok when we have way bigger issues, I have a problem with, right? It's not that TikTok's bringing them through the border, it's you're letting them through the border. Even if you just look at the evacuation from Kabul, right? They say, oh, it's the most successful. We took out 120,000 people. We took out 120,000 of the wrong people, right? There's like 70,000 people. We don't know who they are. And they're there because there's these NGOs affiliated with State Department, right? And they wanted to save a bunch of humans. And they're like, come to the airport. You don't even need ID. Bring like an electricity bill. So it's almost like this white savior complex. I know that sounds really bad. And they just almost care about numbers, right? Then, hey, are we bringing in the right people? Are we taking care of the right people? Like, are these people dangerous to bring into our community? Like, they're not thinking through that, right? They just want to say, oh yeah, we helped 500 people, donors, give us more money. And it's almost like this broken system. A lot of people don't realize if someone is willing to commit a crime to come into the country, they're involved in other crimes. And we always try to say this about our terrorists, right? They're involved in things like money laundering. Obviously, we know in drugs, a lot of child exploitation. We had another Benghazi attacker detained in October who actually we thought was dead because he was reportedly killed in a U.S. drone strike. He wasn't. He was captured for basically raping a child. Terrorists are criminals and they are involved in a bunch of other crimes. And so, like I said, we need to view all this as criminal activity.
What do you think it'll look like when they start attacking within the U.S. and Europe? Is it going to look like what we just saw happen in Russia?
They're always going to do that type, right? Because that's the soft target. That's where terrorism comes from, right? You're like terrorizing the people. You're making the government look bad. I don't think that's going to stop. But I think they care a little more about establishing, spreading Sharia in Islamic State. And you don't get a lot of benefit if you carry out like 10 attacks in America, because then America's like, okay, we're going to get back involved in Afghanistan, right? They want to build this safe haven. They want to grow this safe haven. They want to train their new fighters. They want to expand, hopefully, into Pakistan, and people let them. So we have to look at it in the way Al-Qaeda looks at it. They're very patient. They have a long plan. We're a piece of the long plan, but they don't get a lot of benefit from doing X, Y, and Z. It's not saying they won't do an attack. It's just they have things that are so much more important to them. And remember, they're still getting a win. They're attacking Americans in Iraq. Come around like March 2020, ISKP is having their Shura meeting. So all their senior leaders who run the different committees and the head, and it's down in Kandahar. It gets raided. So they go in and they arrest everyone. They arrest like 38 people and they detain them all. So all the senior leadership now of ISKP is basically in prison. And the funny part is they also arrested 4 Russian women with them, which is actually like super funny because I'm going to just tell a little story. I was on an airplane once to Quetta and there was hardly anyone on the plane. So the flight attendant got really chatty with me. And then she goes, "Are you Russian?" And I said, "No, why would you ever think I'm Russian?" She said, "The only white people who come to Quetta are Russian prostitutes." And I was like, "What? You think I'm a prostitute?" So the funny part is when I heard there's 4 Russian women in this raid, I'm like, oh my God, that's where the Russian prostitutes go. They hang on the wings of the Shura meeting for the terrorists. So anyway, which is another thing, right? These terrorists want to stone women for adultery and they're bringing in Russian prostitutes, and I'm tired of the crap. But there's also a threat going on, as you can imagine, to our allies. So they captured 30,000, but then there's like 70,000 missing total. They killed 10,000. They're able to do this because they're using biometrics, right? Biometrics we left behind. Those biometrics sit in the Ministry of Interior building, right? So I want people to understand, like, the Taliban are like really targeting these people, and that's how they're finding them and getting them. What a lot of people don't understand is kind of within the first year after the fall, the Taliban didn't really have the biometrics up and running. They almost faked it. Then they went to like the Chinese and the Iranians and they said, hey, help us fix, we can't get this all working. So they got the system working, and then they got it deployed on mobile devices, right? So now it's at the border crossings. So I want Afghans to understand, if you went through a border crossing like 6 months after the fall and you were fine, don't assume you're fine now, because they didn't have it working then, even though they pretended it.